It's great to see some new names on the list. Welcome, folks. Is Israel, are you related to Abby? Is that to Abby Ortega?
No.
I didn't catch that, sorry.
Sorry, I was muted there. No, I don't think so. There's no relationship.
Okay, just coincidence. That's kind of cool. Hey Bob, how's it going?
Doing good here. I'm working on 2 computers. I bricked my Mac. So I'm reinstalling everything this afternoon.
Oh, nice.
I back up, so it's not a big deal.
Oh, that's good. That's good. The logo is still getting a lot of street cred.
Oh, cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. Pretty sure that we're gonna have like somehow it might show up. So you guys know I-70 is being redone, so it might show up, you know, on I-70 somewhere.
Nice.
Fancy street art.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Wouldn't that be awesome? Yeah, I'm just kidding. That would be awesome.
I know graffiti artists, we can make it happen.
I mean, we have all summer, Bob.
Oh yeah.
All right, Emily, maybe I'll just turn it over to you. Everyone, Emily Carbone with Northern Waters, part of our planning team, is going to be facilitating our call today.
Thanks, Lorna. Let me share my screen quick. Are you seeing the slides?
Yeah, we're seeing them.
Okay. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'm Emily Carbone at Northern Water, part of the planning team, and we can just do quick introductions for the planning team. Lorna, do you want to go first?
No, I can't find mute. Oh, hey guys, I'm Laura Cates with Denver Water. And I'll pass it on to Taylor.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, hi everyone. Taylor Winchell with Denver Water, and I'll pass it to Paige.
Yep, I'm Paige Weil with Lynker, and we've been supporting this project and just super excited about it. I don't see if Jeff is on here, but if Jeff's on, Jeff, you can go.
If not, then Ken, are you on?
Yes, Ken Curtis, Dolores Water.
Great, thanks. So we've got a great agenda coming up today. We have, first of all, Jeff is gonna, well, I guess once Jeff gets on, he's gonna give us some updates on April and May ASO flights in Colorado. Some interesting results there. And then we're going to move on to a panel discussion with some, Taylor's going to lead that with some really great different participants about how they use ASO data. That should give us some ideas for how it will be useful in our organizations and in organizations that we get data from. So that should be a useful discussion. And then some project updates from Paige at Lynker, and then a little bit of homework. So is Jeff on yet?
Doesn't look like it. If he doesn't come on in a minute or so, we can jump into the panel if you'd like, but I don't know if anyone knows where Jeff might be. Lorna, you're on mute.
It's only been over a year. Yeah, why don't we go ahead and start with the panel? And I'll send Jeff a note.
Sounds good. Thanks. I will stop sharing.
Awesome. Good to go, Emily.
Yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, so we wanted to get a panel together of people that have really used like ASO data users, people that have taken ASO data and put it to use, and hear about their experience and what they've done already and what they see as kind of the future of ASO and really the value add of ASO. So we have a really great panel of 6 panelists here today, and big thanks to all of them for joining us. And so first we'll just go through and let each person do a quick introduction, just who they are, their organization, and where they're based. So Nathan.
Thanks, Taylor. So I'm Nathan Elder with Denver Water. I manage our raw water supply section. And within that section, we manage a 4,000 square foot collection system with 10 major reservoirs that serves 1.5 million people in the Denver metro area.
Awesome. Thanks, Nathan. Maybe just a quick reminder to everyone to mute if you're not speaking. Susan?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is Susan Beharry. I work for Reclamation in the Western Colorado area office in Durango, Colorado, and I am the hydrologist charged with forecasting operations and planning for all of the federal projects in the San Juan River Basin. So it's 5 reservoirs. One is a 5 reservoirs and 1 CRSP unit, the Navajo unit. So thank you for having me on today.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And Chad?
Yes, thank you for the invitation as well. My name is Chad Moore. I'm the Restoration Flow Science Coordinator for the San Joaquin River Restoration Program in California. We have a consortium of people that we work with both in the watershed and the surrounding watersheds in California for essentially the past 5 years.
Awesome, thanks. Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt Meadows from Kings River Water Association. I'm the assistant water master for the Kings River. Drains about 1,500 square miles of the Southern Sierra, just south of the San Joaquin River, where Chad Moore is at, part of a consortium of High Sierra ASO users.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. And then Patrick.
Hi, I'm Patrick Cormus, a senior hydrologist at the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center, based in Salt Lake City. So we provide stream flow and water supply forecasts for the Colorado Basin and the Eastern Great Basin. So I'm a forecaster for Duchesne and Lower Green and part of the Great Basin, and kind of a focal point for all things snow here, trying to stay up with all the research projects, advances and development that we have going on.
Thanks, Patrick. And then last but not least, Mike.
Hey everybody, Mike Anderson, California Department of Water Resources. I'm the state climatologist for California. Been involved with ASO almost from the beginning. My job is to try and evaluate observations for California, figure out what works, work with our partners to figure out how we continue to advance our capabilities and navigate the adventures of a warming world.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to all panelists for joining today. And we're happy to have some partners from California on here. We've both been learning a lot from each other through this process. So excited to hear the different stories from both states, as well as outside of both of our states. So the way we're going to run this panel today is each panelist is going to just start by giving us their story on how they've used ASO data and the value that it's added to them. And so we're going to hear from each panelist, and then we'll head into a Q&A session after that. So we'll just go back through in that same order. So Nathan, you want to tell us how you've used ASO data?
Yes, we've been able to use ASO data 2 years. So in 2019, which was an extremely wet year, a big snowpack year, we used it above Dillon Reservoir, and that year we had a really late runoff and still a really high snowpack, and it helped us have confidence in our decision making and increasing outflows from the reservoir to manage for a large amount of water still coming into the reservoir after the 4th of July, which is, not typical for this particular watershed. And then this year it's been a little bit drier, and we've seen that there's a little bit more water in the snowpack than we are anticipating from our second flight, which is going to allow us to let some more water out of Dillon Reservoir, so that we don't owe a larger portion of that water downstream from other reservoirs and lower those other reservoirs too much over the summer.
Awesome. Thanks, Nathan. So it sounds like it's really contributed to your real-time decision making in both years.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you're just allowing us to have more confidence in those decisions rather than being more of a toss-up, or eliminating those unknowns so that we can operate the reservoir better.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that description, Nathan. Much appreciated. And then I think with that, we'll move on to Susan.
Okay.
All
right. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Great. So good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm Susan Beharry. Like I said, I work for Reclamation in Durango, Colorado, and I operate projects in the San Juan River Basin. I'm a very small piece of Reclamation. I just operate in a single basin. So my comments today will be very specific to my particular operations down here. I know that, there are lots of other projects going on within Reclamation, and, ASO is rapidly expanding its use in Reclamation. So, if anybody has questions on those, I think we have some folks from R&D and TSC on the phone too. But I'm just going to stick with my basin here. We're very new to ASO down in the San Juan River Basin. As far as I know, this is the first time we will have this coverage for the Animas River Basin, and the Dolores River Basin, which were flown twice this year. So this is very much a testing year for us. We are looking at what data is available, what the product is, how it comes in, to determine sort of how it's useful for us. For the most part, I am kind of a, I guess, I don't know if you call it end user, but you know, I have to wait for the data to be processed through forecast basically before I really use it. So Reclamation officially uses CBRFC's official forecasts. I know that you know, CBRFC will be talking about it later, so I won't really touch on that. But those are the official forecasts that we use right now for operations. But since we have other forecasts that are possibly incorporating ASO data, this year I've been running other forecasts as well. So I've been running CBRFC as usual, CBRFC statistical projections, NRCS forecasts, and this is the first year I've been running WRF hydro projections, which do use the ASO data. So I make comparisons of each forecast every month, and I'm noting which ones use the ASO data and in what way. Obviously, they're all developed under different assumptions and methodologies, and their use of ASO is varied or not in use yet. So right now I'm definitely in a fact-finding mode. I'm trying to figure out, you know, what the impacts of this information are on the various forecasts. Our reservoirs, you know, as you can imagine, are all probably very similar to, you know, what most people are working with, these high elevation snowpack, spill and fill reservoirs. We want to obviously limit that spill factor and make the most efficient fill possible. So having a really accurate spatial understanding of what the snowpack is doing is, you know, pretty critical to limiting any inefficiencies in your filling operations. We also have a CRSP reservoir that provides water for tribal entities, irrigation, M&I, and we make ESA releases. And those are pretty essential. It's pretty essential to know exactly what volume is going to be coming in, so we know, you know, we aren't wasting a single drop down here in the Four Corners area. We're rapidly approaching very we're on the edge of a very serious situation. So making sure that we can account for every drop is essential. We also have McPhee Reservoir in our basin, deals with very high demands and a very limited supply. So, you know, we're accounting for every drop of water, every snowflake is essential to the success of its operations. And I'll just mention one other thing I'm working on with ASO data right now, which is the last few years, my office, we've been working very closely with Center for Snow and Avalanche Studies. I think Jeff might be on, and also in our Reclamation's Technical Service Center, and we're kind of developing this snow dashboard that combines a variety of data in graphical format. Right now, it's specific to our operations here in Western Colorado. It has a variety of purposes. It helps us, you know, look at forecast timing, volume of river peaks in real time, and dust on snow activity, which is a real big concern down here. And now, so it combines a variety of data, SNODAS, CSAS, USGS, NRCS data. And now we're looking at, now that we have this ASO data, we're in the exploratory phase of how to add that to this sort of, I would almost call it like reading music. You're looking at this, you know, timeline of information in a graphical format altogether. And I think ASO could possibly add to that picture. So that's pretty much all I have. I know, like I said, R&D and TSC from Reclamation have several projects in the works. I know that we have several emergent snow technology projects that will focus specifically on ASO. You know, suffice it to say, Reclamation is pretty seriously investigating this as a very valuable tool for our operations going forward. And I'll just leave it there.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan. A lot of great info to dive deeper into in the Q&A period. Appreciate that description.
Hey,
And,
Taylor.
yeah.
Just a quick clarification for folks on the phone. So when Susan was talking about the WRF hydro model, that is an alternative tool for creating stream flow forecasts. So the Southwest region is exploring with David Gotchis the use of this, the WRF hydro as a forecasting tool for that region. So that's not something that we were doing explicitly as part of our program, but it's something that we're keeping our eye on, so we can think about and bring that type of learnings from what they're finding in the Southwest back to the group.
Thanks. And Dave has integrated the ASO data with the Wharf Hydro model, correct? Yes, lots of nodding heads. Thanks. Great. Thanks again, Susan. Chad, you want to tell us your story?
Yeah, happy to. So the San Joaquin River Restoration Program is genesis is in a settlement. So the purpose of what we do is to restore a salmon run, a spring run, Chinook salmon run to the San Joaquin River, California's second longest river. And we also have a project, various projects to mitigate impacts to the water users. And we use about basically 20% of their water for those environmental purposes. So ASO was a project that we identified early on, about 6 years ago, as something that checked a lot of the boxes, in particular assisted with our efforts for salmon restoration, as well as assisted the water users. So, I think about ASO as really a tool to narrow down uncertainty. So, your uncertainties come from uncertainty over your present condition and the future conditions. And if you know what your present condition is, and you will with ASO, that really narrows down your span of uncertainty for water management, reservoir management. So, your 90 and your 10% exceedance aren't so far apart, they're a little bit narrower. And that allows you to do a lot of things. Small gains in that span really help you allocate water to the environment earlier on a more timely basis. Do so with confidence that you aren't going to be sorry you released that water down the river when it should have gone to an ag field, or vice versa. And of course, on the flood side, managing a reservoir, whether for public safety or just water optimization, is great. In fact, in California, with our groundwater and ground subsidence issues, there's such a premium on groundwater recharge that there's even a greater emphasis on forecast accuracy. So the moment you know that there is an ounce of water that you can't store in a reservoir, there is someone waiting to pay for that water to put it back in the ground. So I think that's a big part of what we've observed, is being able to reduce that conflict between the environment and agricultural water users. So, with ASO, you're going to know what the snowpack is with a fairly high degree of certainty. And that's going to open up a whole new line of questions, one of which is what your watershed, your runoff efficiencies are. What's your watershed yield? And so, this is starting to be talked about, particularly in light of increased evapotranspiration, is that, we're not going to see the normal yields that we have in the past. So in the San Joaquin, we have 13,000 feet of relief in the watershed. It's about 1 million acres. In 2017, one of our wettest years on record, we saw a bulk efficiency of 85%. 85% of the water that landed on the watershed came off the watershed. In contrast, 2021, we're seeing a bulk efficiency of about 30%. So particularly in those areas with a lot of interannual precipitation, the uncertainty over runoff efficiency is as great as sort of knowing how much snow is there. Fortunately, ASO also helps with that. We've been deploying a fairly basic water budget model. We treat the ASO flights not just as snapshots, but we look at them as pairs. So we say, okay, we had an ASO flight in March, we had one in April. Over this time, we had this much snowpack reduction. We had this much precipitation based on either a model or however you want to estimate precipitation in the watershed. And then we had this much natural river produced. And so that's really teaching us a lot about runoff efficiencies, which is a really important aspect of water management, and perhaps increasing so. And again, ASO helps to address that tool. Two other points. One thing that I think is a really good future with ASO is gauging, developing better gauging networks. Lindsay Barrup, who's on this call from Reclamation TSC, has been exploring that line of research. And then another one is tuning your models. This is a great tool for tuning your models. You're not always going to be able to get a flight up, either because of weather or just cost. So having a reliable model to give you daily information in between your ASO surveys is really valuable. So we've been doing a lot with, previously with Agricultural Research Service and their iSnowball model to tune that model up using the ASO data. It's a great verification tool. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Chad. Just a quick follow-up. I'm wondering if you could talk about a specific like example year of when you've used, like how, when ASO data has like impacted your environmental flow decisions in the San Joaquin.
I'm trying to think of a year that hasn't impacted. Well, let's talk about, I mean, flood flows, is one example. So, if you are going to be spilling water, you can do so in an environmentally friendly way. You can start those flood flows earlier, you can extend them longer. You can have flood peaks that come down gradually, get your floodplain development, get juvenile salmon moving out into the floodplain, develop the food on the floodplain and grow those fish. So, I think the old method was very much like, of reservoir management. You basically fill the reservoir and then you'd start to spill and you just let it go. And then when the runoff tapered off, you would shut the valves. And so you'd end up with this very sort of blocky hydrograph that didn't accomplish much. It didn't recharge groundwater like it could have. It just blasted out to the sea and didn't do a lot on its way out. In 2017, we were the second wettest year in 120 years. And I think our reservoir filled in late July, like final filling was late July. But as early as June 1st, we pegged the total runoff within 1%. So back at the beginning of June, we knew what the runoff was going to be within 1%. And so we were able to prescribe a flood release that gradually went up and gradually went down and accomplished a lot of other ecological objectives while costing zero water to anyone else. And the only postscript to that is that this was a new tool. I think management didn't believe us that we knew what the water runoff was to such a high degree. So they didn't really follow our plan. But we were able to show in hindsight that we really did know where we were hydrologically and that we could have implemented that plan with hardly any adjustments and it would have worked perfectly and we would have, saved every drop. And so, it will take a while for water managers, senior water managers to become comfortable with this tool, but we're getting there.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. And just to clarify that 1%, pegging runoff within 1% was using the ASO information to do that, correct?
That is correct. We have, of course, there's a lot of different forecast models out there you can lean on, but that was a key part of it. I think by then we had 5 ASO flights and then we had 2 additional ASO flights after that, but didn't end up changing our forecast for 4.4 million acre feet of runoff on a 1 million acre watershed. So it was a big year.
Thanks. And then just 2 quick questions before we move on to Matt here. So Sean Fleming asked, interesting about using ASO sweep pairs to estimate runoff efficiency. What ballpark numbers are you getting for runoff efficiency?
Well, I mentioned the 30% to 85% from a really dry year to a really wet year. That's what we see. San Joaquin has the upper basin is very steep, granitic. Yields up there are dry years are 80%, wet years are 95%. Runoff efficiencies that is highly dependent on antecedent conditions and evapotranspiration. So that's where we see a lot of flux. As we get to the tail end of our snowmelt season, and all we have is the snowmelt that's up above 11,000 feet, we see a lot more consistency in runoff. But yeah, it's shocking how much difference there is in runoff efficiencies from year to year and one elevation band to another.
Great, thanks. And then just one more quick question. Alex Flanagan from the Army Corps asked, what month was the 1% accuracy forecast made and when did the project fill?
It was made, that forecast was made, I believe, is on June 6th. And the reservoir stayed filled throughout July. I think probably it was, up around the top of the reservoir for all the month of July, and we didn't stop flood flows until mid-August. And find that the San Joaquin is 9 reservoirs, all in in echelon up there. So it's a pretty complicated system.
Gotcha.
I hope that answers their question.
Yeah, a lot of good info, and really appreciate the environmental flow perspective here. So thanks, Chad, and we'll dive back into some of this in the Q&A as well. And then with that, move on to Matt Meadows from the Kings River Water Association.
Hi, the one thing I've learned about ASO is that the more people that you have, the more neighbors that you have using it, the more communication that you have within the group, the faster you can incorporate the data. I know what Chad has done, being able to put it into new developed tools, or just using it to go, all right, which forecast do I believe in? Before it's ever developed into a runoff model, you can start using those data right away. And it on either end, you can use in a normal year or a drought year, using it to try to bookmark what is my lowest possible runoff I believe I'm going to get. And how does that align with the forecasts that are available in your region? In flood years, doing the same thing. What is the lowest I think I can get? How does that compare with the forecast models? But then if I think my runoff efficiencies are going to be exceptionally high, based on all the science that you might have for your watershed, where do I think I'm going to be? And an example of that was in 2019. The Kings Basin is a big watershed. And at that time, that was the first year where we were really getting full basin coverage with ASO flights and running operational snow models for the basin. And what it gave us was an idea of how much snow volume we had. We compared it to the current forecast that were available, and we quickly realized that we needed to make early flood releases, because we were going to be able to fill a reservoir, but and not have to worry about emergency flood releases at a later date. So we ended up having 2 separate flood release time periods. The way the precipitation came in, we decided to curtail that first flood release time period and then go back into flood release later, when we knew that we had the water available. But we were able to capture about 100 to 150,000 acre feet of water and have it get diverted and used for either irrigation or groundwater recharge that would have otherwise not been available. The Kings River is an interesting basin. It's just one basin south of the San Joaquin. Historically, the Kings River would flow into what used to be the Tulare Lake. It's one of several rivers that flows into this huge area of land in the Central Valley of California, the San Joaquin Valley. And it was only during high flow time periods when it would kind of fill up various lakes, marshes, sloughs, other things like that, connect to the San Joaquin River, and then go out to the ocean. So being able to get the water into the ground at a reasonable controlled rate keeps the Tulare lake bottom, which is all agriculture land, from becoming a lake again. The drainage area that we are talking about in the mountains is about 1 million acres. Pine Flat holds about 1 million acre feet of water, and our annual runoff averages about 1.7 million acre feet. So that's just a little example. 2019, we were using it. We saw the numbers. We were trying to apply some new ideas about runoff efficiency across an elevation band that ranges from where these terminal reservoirs are, like Pine Flat and Millerton, are in the 900-foot elevation, with mountains that go up to 14,000 feet. So it's a very dramatic geologic area that has all types of different vegetation, different soils, different rocks. And what we did was try to build a simple tool for water budget that took some science literature and applied evapotranspiration and came up with what became a much better tool that Chad put together on runoff efficiency. And it was based on this elevation band runoff efficiency idea. And then the other thing I wanted to hit on is something I've talked about for a long time, is when you talk about these really large areas. I've talked about 1 million acres being large. The Colorado Basin is humongous. So the ability to, say, fly the whole thing in a day, or even get a flight at the exact time you want it, can be very hard. Not impossible, but very hard. Clouds like to block our view. Weather likes to be bad at the wrong time. It'll be crystal clear day. Anytime you don't want to flight, the day you want to flight, that's when you get precipitation. We like the precipitation, but we also like the information that we get from ASO. So one thing I've been a proponent of is taking the long-term record and history that we have with snow surveying and the sensor network, and using ASO to validate sensors and also the sample points for the snow survey, which requires that you have a GPS location for everywhere you have a snow survey sample. But what it can give you is an idea of, all right, I have these long-term statistical relationships between these snow survey sites and runoff that may or may not be affected by climate change. And you have ASO, which is giving you a volume of snowpack. Well, if you kind of meld them together and use ASO as a tool to say, make a synthetic snow survey, does that give you any information you can glean on what your runoff might be? That's something I've kind of been interested in and a proponent of. I guess the other thing is that interplay between sensors, snow surveys, and ASO, I think is really important to not lose sight of, the two-way street between those techniques. I think the ASO folks can talk to it better than I can about the importance of having those on the ground measurements to give you the best estimate from their product. I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Again, lots of really great stuff there. And especially the example year that I think we've heard talked about before of being able to put an extra 100 to 150,000 acre feet of water to use is a really unique example. Moving on to Patrick Kormos from the CBRFC.
Hey, everybody. How's my audio? Okay.
Yeah, it's great.
Great. Thanks. This is what I look like. I'm on a hotspot, so I'm going to turn my video off real quick. So thanks again for the opportunity to talk to you guys a little bit about how we're using ASO data, a little bit more nuts and bolts. We're the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center again, so we put out forecasts for the whole Colorado River Basin. And we don't have a ton of ASO data in Colorado yet, so we're still in the evaluation phase. So once we get a flight, we get some data, we'll download it and pull it up in some GIS software, and just to kind of make sure everything makes sense, play with the mins and maxes, catch any negative values or flight lines and things like that. Just kind of really give it a once over. And see how it looks. Then we'll dig into the report and see how they estimated density, whether they incorporated the ice snowbow model and how it was adjusted and things like that. So just kind of really give it a good shakedown and see where the data is coming from. So we use basically a hydrologic response unit model. So we have zones. So we have a software system to kind of pull out mean aerial snow water equivalents from ASO. So we essentially just process the data, get the basin SWEs, get it to the hydrologists that are responsible for those basins, and basically just compare it and see, how different is the ASO data than our model data. Does it make sense? Things of that nature. Then I'll go to an offline version of our model, and I'll just kind of directly insert the ASO snow water equivalent into our model and just see what it would do to our snowpack. And I'll, run our ensemble stream flow prediction system and get a spread of values so we can compare it to every day we run a model and give people a forecast with a spread of uncertainties. Well, we can look at what the ASO data does to that spread, bumps it up or down and things of that nature. And we'll get that to the hydrologist responsible for that basin. So, right now we're using it very qualitatively. When it comes to value added, I'll say preliminary results have indicated that our forecasts are improved. Sometimes it would have, in hindsight, improved it a lot, and sometimes a very little bit or even degraded it a little bit. But we're cautiously optimistic about the future of incorporating ASO data. We're excited to get more data over the same basins. That would be really helpful. So, for instance, in 2018 and 19, we had, upper Taylor flights, but this year we didn't get any upper Taylor flights. So now, we have different basins that we're trying to evaluate it at instead of having repeat flights over the same basins. But as we get more data, we're really excited to see if it consistently improves it, just how we get it out of the box, or maybe as Matt mentioned, we can make some comparisons or relationships between the model SWE and the ASO SWE as we get more data. And then the other thing, when it comes to value added, is the LiDAR data. The snow off data is just a wealth of information. So as we're going to move to kind of a more distributed model, those snow off flights can be very valuable in parameterizing, a more distributed model. And the snow on flights, if we have the time and energy, we can, maybe evaluate our model calibration. We can go back and say, well, at the highest elevations, there's actually less snow than our model has in those zones, and we can maybe go back and revisit the calibration of those models. So that's all I had. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Definitely great to hear the forecasting perspective from you. And then we will move on and hear from Mike Anderson, the California State climatologist. And then after that, we'll move into a Q&A period. So you can queue up some questions if you have them. Thanks, Mike.
All right, cool. So my work with ASO data is really exploring the idea of how we evolve our observing systems as we try and navigate a warming world, and we see a changing distribution of snow on our landscape. During the testing of ASO, we just happened to have years that were near average, near record low, a new record low, and near a new record high. If you wanted to plan, submit, a list of desired outcomes to test a product on, Mother Nature did quite nicely for us in really spanning the range and giving us those opportunities, as Chad mentioned, to really explore value, both when you have to optimize whatever water's on the landscape, as well as making sure you can maximize the ability to avoid hazard and get benefit out of that water that is on the landscape. As we move to the future and the world continues to warm, we're seeing a change in the way snow lies on the landscape. So the old index-based methods end up, you find yourself on the fringe of it more and more. And so finding ways to augment your toolkit is what we've been looking at for quite a while now. And ASO really looks to be kind of that ability to really quantify not only the total amount on the watershed, but the way it's put onto the watershed, because that will impact how it comes off just due to geophysical parameters like aspect, day of the year, length of day. So really being able to quantify how that change is happening is really important. And so really understanding, again, this pivot from kind of an index-based world and trying to navigate describing change with indices into a spatially explicit world where you're really looking at spatially explicit descriptions of what we're seeing and how it's changing is really going to be exciting, and looking forward to seeing how much we can pull out of this particular product.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. And with that, I certainly have quite a few questions, but being that we probably have about 20 minutes left for the panel, I think just off the bat, maybe just open it to the audience, see what questions you all have out there for the panel in general or anyone specific on the panel.
Hey, Taylor.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll throw one out there for everybody. Obviously, as we are dipping our toe into this out here in Colorado, we're keeping most of our flights at 10,000 feet. which is where we historically see our maximum snow. And I think I copied Chad's note that the efficiencies are probably higher up there. But we don't capture our total basin. And I think it was Matt was talking about some of the benefits of the total basin. Does anybody with experience have comments on partial basin flights and how you use those?
This is Matt. I I'd say so. If say you have a snowpack model that can be updated by ASO flights, um, you're flying partial basins. So part of those basins might be trued up to what we are assuming is near reality with that ASO flight. Um, and then you make assumptions about the rest of your basin. Sometimes we've made some assumptions pending an ASO acquisition that have been correct, and sometimes we have not because of the geography that Mike Anderson had mentioned. We have, depending on how the storm hits, it can hit the San Joaquin and maybe a little bit of the northern part of my watershed, but then not the rest. So if I'm making my assumption based off of flight information in the north, that might not translate to the middle or south fork. So there is some value. I think there is value in kind of partial areas. And I think there's also some value in some of the lower fringe. So say 10,000 is I know I'm going to have snow from here to there, but I don't know, what if your transitional snow line is down to 7,000? What information can you gain from having flown that part of the basin? Do you get an idea of how much water is going to be used by the vegetation in that area? I know we've had times where it's like, okay, we could only fly one part. Which part do you want to do? Well, I'm going to fly the part that I think is going to give me 75% of my water. So you might make that decision.
Chad, on your 1% year in 2017, did you fly the total basin?
Yeah, we flew all the snow free every time. This year we, for cost savings reasons, we kind of toyed around with just doing partial upper elevation stuff. You could probably get away with that in dry years, but in really wet years, you're going to get high yields from all elevation bands. And so, if you do that approach and you find yourself in a really wet year, it's going to be hard to shift gears and then say, well, I know I flew my first one at 10,000 feet. And I think now I'm worried it's going to be a really, really wet year. I better fly down to 8,000 or 7,000 feet. Well, but then you don't have the information on what was there before. So you're starting to lose information on your watershed efficiencies. Again, I think this question of watershed efficiency is just as important as snowpack volume. Not that I know over time this can be optimized, and how it's optimized is going to depend on the hypsography and of your basin. It just seems like it's a little bit of a better approach to start with sort of very complete surveys, and then you can kind of figure out how to optimize as you go, both in terms of spatial coverage and in terms of the timing of those flights. But I'm really glad that we did our entire snow-free area for the first few years.
I can add that there depending on where you are in the world, there can be some difficulties with that. Jeff might be able to tell you, or maybe he's talked about it before, but the Sierra Nevada has some military restricted airspace that can say only be flown on the weekends. That encompasses quite a bit of the Kings and a couple other sister watersheds. So there are times when the weekends are when we can fly, that's when it's cloudy. But do I want to flight somewhere else? maybe.
Thanks, Matt and Chad. Any other panelists' comments on this question before moving on to the next? Cool, thanks. And just a reminder too, following this panel, Jeff Deems is going to take us through some ASO reports so we can see more specifically what data and what you're actually looking at with the ASO flights. And with that, does what other questions do folks have for the panelists? Well, I can hop in with one. So kind of from the larger or the higher level perspective, from a decision maker perspective, what role do you really see ASO playing in the future of water management in the Western US?
Hey, Taylor, I broke up a little bit on me, that last part of the question. Could you repeat?
Yeah, sorry about that. From a higher level decision maker perspective, what role do you see ASO playing in the future of water management in the Western US?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that one. So I think as we find more and more priorities set for water, asking more and more of water management systems to meet more and more priorities. ASO, as Chad said, you reduce that uncertainty, you clarify the decision space, and you're making the right decision at the right time. In California, I ascribe it to pivoting from a seasonal water management into real-time water management, where you become more dependent on that forecast to be able to make the right decision with the water at the right time. And again, moving from an index-based method where the uncertainties are becoming untenable into a spatially explicit framework, I think will greatly help that endeavor. I have a feeling that we're being given object lessons here on an almost annual basis, demonstrating why we should have done this sooner. But I think we're moving as expeditiously as we can. The challenge with any observing system, as everybody on this call knows, is nobody likes a cost associated with an observing system. Sometimes installation cost is great because it's, look, well, we did something. But when you go back to them to talk about the ongoing O&M tail, that's when it's suddenly hard to find time on anybody's calendar, much less attention from decision makers who can manage budgets. I think with ASO, and Chad and Matt mentioned this both, you have the ability not only to serve a single sector, but really get to broader resource management. And I think this is an area where we need, as the user community, to get some help in better articulating the broader value element to the ASO product, the LiDAR-based information, spatially explicit information, not only for water management, forest management, wildlife management. It will greatly help, I think, in getting people interested in understanding where the value of the data contributes their ability to make decisions to be successful.
Thanks, Mike. One of the things that kind of stood out to me during this conversation is, and Taylor kind of summarized it really quickly after Matt spoke, is, we're finding potentially 100 to 150,000 acre feet of water, more water than we thought we had. So what is the value of having knowledge of this additional resource and the ability to manage it? And then how do we do that as what we heard from Chad and Matt and really everyone so far, when we can do that really efficiently and, optimize it in a way that we've never been able to do before, because we have accurate information at points in time. So Taylor, I know that's not exactly what you're asking, and I'm not a panelist, but that's what kind of stood out to me as everyone was speaking. I have a question, but let's see if anyone else has any more comments on that. Okay, well, my question, I think Chad, you were kind of noting this. But for me, I consider ASO to be, really accurate source of information at a point in time, right? So it's like your ground truth at a point in time. And you suggest you were kind of articulating how it was harder to communicate that upstream. So, my question for all the panelists is, how have you been able to communicate the value of this information? Because it is a new tool, right? So it's scary. New science is either considered to be always to be better, or it's, approached with significant caution. So I wonder if you guys have had any successes with communicating this upstream as well as outside of your organizations.
Yeah, I'll start. I think that looking at all of you here, there's a sort of groundswell of interest. And so one of the things that we did on the San Joaquin, because we were using new tools and we were, stepping outside the normal routine of just operating off the California DWR and the River Forecast Center information. We've been, for the past couple of years, holding monthly meetings where the forecasting team goes through all of the data, looks at the ASO data and says, basically, here's the ASO data and here's how we modified our runoff projections on our reservoir management based on this information. We open our books to our water users, to the environmentalists. We invite Matt Meadows from the neighboring watershed. We have the ARS iSnowball team. We have the ASO team participating. And you basically have a good discussion. And I think that transparency is pretty important because people will see real time your mistakes and your triumphs. And you will learn fast how to use this data because people are looking over your shoulders. And in our case, we're spending their money, right? So ASO in the San Joaquin is funded partly by the restoration program, partly by Reclamation at large, partly by the water users, partly by DWR. So here's what you're getting for your money. And here's how we're using it. I think that's not typically how reclamation works, but that's been successful for us.
I'll follow on with Chad. I think it's one way to actually get that broader buy-in that this isn't just a science project, are those success stories, and getting somebody who's capable not only in the water management arena, but in the ability to relate the value of that data that provided them. Get them to speak and share these stories. We have our water users in the San Joaquin and their ability to talk about what value they got out in 2017, not only in the water management, but in the emergency response. How do you navigate trying to balance filling your reservoir and avoiding downstream hazard? In some years, that can be a very, very fine line. And with uncertainty, if you err on the wrong side, in a wet year, you've dumped too much water, you don't fill, and you have customers asking you, what were you doing? And Matt's nodding his head. I think they probably don't use quite that polite a language with him, but on the flip side, you try to fill and you end up spilling water, then you create a whole different set of circumstances in the downstream regions, which also lead to a lot of questions. So again, getting the people that can tell those stories of the successes of how they were able to reduce that uncertainty, how it clarified their decision space, and the value it gained, not only for them, but for the people they're talking to. So how does that fit on a political agenda of environmental restoration, of making resources available, avoiding telling people there's not enough water for these uses? Those stories, I think, will help them connect the dots. And as I say, this can't be a dot to dot. This can't be an impressionistic painting. This has to be a Dutch masterpiece that you tell them.
And Mike, on that, if you get 1/4 of a Dutch masterpiece, do you have a Dutch masterpiece? So if you have an area, let's just say the San Joaquin, that says, we're going to do it. We have funding lined up from multiple sources. And then the next watershed to the north, south, east, west, whatever it might be, people can't come up with it. Does that help you? And I guess it really depends on the geography and how the water runs off. My watershed and Chad's watershed have some interconnectedness. So on flood release side, I can get water from the San Joaquin River when they might be near crisis. It might eventually come back into the San Joaquin 60 miles downriver or 90 miles downriver. I can't remember the exact river mileage, pardon me. Pardon me. But there's a huge time delay, and I might be able to soak a lot of that into the ground where I might not need to go into flood release until 2-3 weeks later, just because of runoff timing or the fact that the Kings has the same watershed area, but twice as much storage capacity in our terminal reservoir. So there's a balance, I think, not only on the dry side, but these wet sides with the plumbing and the geography that has to be considered. And by having a program that's going to cover your whole region, like as Mike said, the Dutch masterpiece, you have a full Dutch masterpiece. You don't have bits and pieces of it.
Yeah, and I do think we have to be better about differentiating where you see that Dutch masterpiece and where you don't. Where the decision space was clear and where it was kind of muddied. And it's hard because the folks that have the kind of muddied part aren't quite as open to sharing about that, because they're looking at it and saying, man, that would be really cool if can get there. And it's just trying to figure out that pathway there to get a fully built out program. And that still is a work in progress. So, but yeah, no, you're right. Try to get the full picture would be a big step.
Thanks, y'all. I think for the sake of time, we're gonna wrap things up here and move on to the rest of our agenda, but I'll give the panelists one more chance if they have any closing thoughts. You don't have to, but if there's anything you still want to say, jump in.
Yeah, I just want to build on that last question, and one thing really quick is, sometimes with this data, it's hard to show that value because the value might be in something that didn't happen, like you prevented flooding and downstream impacts, rather than something that actually happened within your water management. So you really have to be able to tell that story and of what might have happened if you didn't have this data, and be able to show those impacts as well as what decisions you did make based on the data.
Thanks, Nathan. Anyone else have any closing thoughts? All right. Well, with that, thanks so much to all the panelists. There was just a ton of great info, and I think we could probably talk a couple more hours, but I don't think people want to stay on a couple more hours for an all afternoon meeting. So thanks again. And to everyone else in the meeting, if you do have any more questions, feel free to type them in the chat. And if the panelists are still around, they can directly answer them. So thanks again, and we'll pass it back to Emily.
Great, thanks Taylor, and thanks again to all the panelists. That was really interesting and helpful. Lots of things for us to think about. So next, Jeff Deems is going to give us an overview of some of the flights, ASO flights we've had so far this year in Colorado in April and May. So I'll turn it over to Jeff. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. And yeah, thanks again to the panel. Lots of great info that we're learning from the California program. And thanks everyone for helping with the knowledge transfer that's ongoing here. So as Emily mentioned, I'd like to give a quick summary of what we did in Colorado this year, and then walk everyone here through one of our acquisition reports just to show the some of the data summary products that we're working on and actively soliciting feedback from our end users. So this year we managed 2 flights in 4 basins in Colorado, 2 for Denver Water in the Blue River, and then 2 in each of the Dolores, Animas, and Conejos rivers, funded by the CWCB project funds. And the timing for those was basically mid to late April for the first flight, and the middle of May for the southern basins, and later in May for the Blue. The Blue seemed to be stuck in a little pocket of wet and cool weather throughout most of the spring here, which was delaying a lot of the high elevation snow melt. The image in the background there is snow depth, and that's Quandary Peak in the Blue River. And I'll show a slightly broader image there, but it's typical of the higher elevations in Colorado, where we see this extreme difference in our variability in snow depth across the basin, and the colors there go from 0 to 3 meters plus. Some of those deep reds up in the cirques is pushing 10 or 12 meters deep. So as we're all well aware at this point, the ability to capture that kind of information can really really change the view of what the snow volume is in the watershed. Click, there we go. A couple more views like this. Here's the Animas River, in part of the Animas River. This is the 19th of April. I didn't do a good job of annotating this image, but we're kind of looking to the northwest here, and you can see Highway 550 down in the bottom running over Mullis Pass. So Silverton off to the right, towards Durango, and Coalbank Pass off to the left. And pretty dry year down south, has no surprise there. A lot of the water really concentrated in these high northeast facing basins. And then as we flip to the mid-May flight, we can see that really the distribution of where those snow drifts are stays the same, the big deep patches. And then we can really see the melt out throughout the rest of the basin, especially on solar slopes and lower elevations. Similar thing here in the Blue River. This is 18th of April, looking southwest along the 10-mile range. I think one thing that kind of shocked everyone, and this was both in the Blue, but also in the southern basins, was just how little snow there was in the Alpine this year. That you can really see the tree line in this image, mainly because snow depths decrease strongly above tree line, except again for those really deep pockets where there's wind drift or avalanche deposits. That same pattern again persists into later in May as the snow line has crept up dramatically, and those deep pockets persisting late into the summer. So for each of those flights, we produce a what we call an acquisition report that summarizes not only the results of the flight and data processing, but also some of the process of getting to those data products. So this is the front page of each of the Blue River and Animas reports from, and I'm looking at the May flights here mainly because it has some comparison images in it. So there's one of these reports for each flight, goes through the full basin water content and any sub-basins that we have broken out. The bottom right is a hypsometric plot showing the distribution of snow water equivalent with elevation. The most recent flight, in this case, May, is in red, and the prior flight is in the blue. So we can see that in both cases, the Blue River on the left and Animas on the right, the lower elevations are melting out. And in both cases here, we've actually gained some water equivalent at the highest elevations. So it's kind of interesting to be able to track that change over time in this sort of condensed format. The eyeball looking plots on the bottom left of each of these, we've affectionately are calling the HAL plots after the HAL computer in the 2001 movie. But these show the distribution of snow water equivalent with aspect and elevation. So basically these plots were looking down on a hypothetical mountain shaped like a cone with the highest elevations in the middle and the lowest elevations around the edge, and then colored by snow water equivalent volume. So in both cases, we can see that the bulk of the snowpack is generally on the northerly and northeasterly slopes, but a little bit of a different distribution between these two basins. Further down in the report, we're experimenting with adding some change since the previous survey in these elevation aspect plots, and also whether to include just the water equivalent volume or also the sweet depth. So the depth combined with the distribution of the terrain gives you the volume. So it can be interesting to look at the distribution of both of those. In either case here, we can see that we did gain snow in the upper elevations, again, predominantly on the northeast in the Blue River and on the northerly slopes in the Animas, while most of the lower elevation slopes substantially lost volume. Again, interesting to be able to see that change over time. These are new products this year, or these plots are, so we're actively seeking some feedback from our users as you are able to ingest these, and happy to take any comments here as well. We started making some different albedo product plots. So we can, with the spectrometer, we can look at snow reflectivity in the visible wavelengths, in the infrared wavelengths, or in the broadband, which covers both of those. And we started making these plots, which are akin to the elevation sweep plots. This is elevation with albedo. And then these little vertical marks along the top represent what a clean, fine-grained, brand new snowpack would look like. So on the Blue River on the left, we see actually a good bit of variation, especially in the visible wavelengths with elevation, with some relatively clean snow up high on the day we flew, and dirtier, older snow down low. On the right, in the Animas from the May flight, we can see that they're pretty linear with elevation at all wavelengths, showing a pretty substantial dust impact down in the Animas this year, with strong reductions in albedo and commensurate influx of solar radiation accelerating snow melt. Let me see if I can grab one of these the full report here just to run through it really quick. Let's see, share that one. There we go. So those were just some highlights from what the reports look like, just scrolling through it here. we go through with some narrative over the background conditions leading up to the flight. We talk extensively about how we constrain and model snow density with field in situ and modeling data, and how we refine the model estimates and to get from snow depth to snow water equivalent. Evaluation of the snow depth measurements. So this is where the comparison with in situ data comes in. And we compare the retrieved snow depth from the ASO system to what's measured on the ground. Again, the snow albedo products and some discussion there. And then a bit of an appendix of existing in situ data and some discussion on snow albedo, how it works and how we measure it. So these products generally serve as, or these reports, I should say, generally serve as a summary product, a bit of explanation on the process, and then also fodder for discussion with the post-acquisition meetings that we like to coordinate with the stakeholders. I will note that we will likely start including in these reports and elsewhere some results from integrations with the Wharf Hydro model forecast system. We've worked with Dave Gotch's group, funded by CWCB as well this year in the Southern Basins, Animas, Dolores, and Conejos, delivering ASO data to Dave's group. They do quantitative assimilation and update their forecast products accordingly. So we see that forecast integration with Wharf Hydro or with other tools as we see fit as being a core capacity going forward. So we'll likely start merging some reporting there. Additionally, we put out interim iSnowBow model reports for the basins that we are running iSnowBow to produce densities for our snow water equivalent calculation. We continue to run that model all the way to snow all gone and produce similar looking reports. We try to keep the feel and some of the content the same for those interim model reports as well. So I think I will stop there and happy to take any questions on this year's progress in Colorado.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, anyone have questions about that? We'll also be sharing those reports, the Animas and Blue reports, after this meeting to get some of your feedback on those reports. And
we can share the Dolores and Conejos as well. They're
okay.
I just grabbed two for show and tell, but and all of those and the data are all up on the ASO website as well.
Hey Jeff, so I really like I like the HAL charts a lot. I think those are great. And I like the HAL change charts. And I'm wondering if the change charts or that change information, going back to our discussion about runoff efficiency, I wonder if that can be one of like an index or indicator that we're looking at with runoff efficiency, especially if we could do that evaluation. Runoff efficiency and elevation bands, across the different basins. That might be a pretty cool index.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Chad and his group in San Joaquin have been doing elevation efficiency curves for a while. I really like what they're doing there, and there could be an analog or an integration with breaking up the ASO data that way. At some point, as you start breaking into terrain and aspect chunks, you start making basically hydrologic response units. So there's probably some applied science question to be delved into a little bit there as to how best to attack that. But I agree that, especially on a per basin basis, where especially the geologic and ecologic constraints on the hydrology vary. with elevation and aspect. I think it's really, I think it'll be fruitful to integrate that kind of information on the per watershed basis.
And that could be an interesting climate change index too. You know. Anyways, thanks, Emily.
Yeah, thanks again, Jeff. And now we'll get an update from Paige about the project status and another one of those surveys to get some feedback. And yeah, take it away, Paige.
Yeah, thanks. Let me just pull up the presentation real quick and steal the screen. All right. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So yeah, a whole bunch of good feedback today. I really appreciate everybody who is taking the time to come to these sessions. And we are recording them. So if there was, I mean, there's a ton of information here. So if there's anything that you wanted to go back through, we'll have those. I don't think we're going to post them online, but we definitely have them for kind of the project team. But I wanted to go through and just do a quick review of where we are with the project and kind of things that are coming up. So the agenda's already been pretty well covered, and we've already gone through most of these things. So I'll skip this, but generally this is our project schedule and kind of where we're at right now. So it's the beginning of June. We're still mid review of the basin flight planning component. And I actually need to update this to correct the spelling. Just noticed that. And starting to develop the questions and approaches that we're going to use for the stakeholder feedback process. And I have a few comments about what we're doing there and the poll that we're going to do at the end is kind of a way for people to indicate their level of interest or the amount of time they have to be a part of whatever process comes out. But this is chugging right along, and really appreciate everybody who's given feedback so far and presented on the value of ASO to their particular agency. So as I said, the basin prioritization and kind of flight planning piece is ongoing and probably won't be completed until we have, or we won't have a rough draft version of that until we have had a chance to do more engaging stakeholder info collection. And that's because while we can make some scientific guesses about when to do flights to collect the most snow information, this project is also primarily about providing operators with the data that they need. So we need info from stakeholders to do that. And part of that feeds into the next bit here, which is developing the stakeholder questions. Just some general themes for what we're going to be asking and how we're going to approach this process involve education on ASO, and we've had a ton of that. So that's more just to make sure that anybody involved in the process understands all these pieces. What different agencies, how different agencies do their decision making, like what decisions they make, how they use snow data, and then following into the next one, what existing snow products do they use, what they might need in an ideal sort of decision-making tool that they may or may not already have, and then the level of involvement they would want, or they would want to be delegated, or they'd be willing to delegate for kind of planning flights every year. Like, do they want to be intimately involved because there has to be a flight in a particular place every year, or is this particular stakeholder one that might benefit from just basin-wide information and they don't actually need site-specific info? So again, these are just some themes for the questions that we're going to be asking when we reach out. So again, with a little more detail, the basin prioritization part, we've done kind of an initial assessment of flight coverage, looking at what an April 1st, which is around peak SWE flight would cover. And we initially guessed it's about 20 flights we initially assessed based on just snow covered area that it's about 20 flights to cover the state. Though timing is key, many groups need to make a decision by April 1st. And that's a lot of what we found in our feedback collection is people know when they need to make a decision. That doesn't mean we need a flight on April 1st. And so the balance there of maybe you don't capture absolute peak SWE, but you do have enough information to make a decision. That's kind of the balance we're trying to strike here. We're working with ASO Inc. They're in the middle of their flight season, as Jeff's presentation showed. But we're working with ASO Inc. to develop an efficient set of flight plans that would cover the 10,000 foot contour, which is a good kind of snapshot for what a lot of the larger flight program might look like. And it's just really to give everybody an idea of how many flights and what kind of efficiencies we can see for key areas. And then stakeholder engagement, as I mentioned, how can ASO improve your group's decision-making? And then what is the ideal timing? So like I said, April 1st, what is the ideal timing for you to have your high resolution SWE data in your hand? Is it April 1st? Are there other key dates for you? This is a slide we've shown before, but generally the goal of the basin prioritization combines both top-down scientific analysis around just when we can fly and what kind of information can be collected, and then the bottom up of when stakeholders actually need the data. And I'm breezing through these. A lot of these are repeat slides, but this is just to point out some of the info we've collected so far for this quick project update. Generally, this is the statewide average SNOTEL from 2000 to 2020, showing approximately when peak SWE, according to SNOTEL, happened, with April 1st falling around the middle of that period. And somewhere between May 15th and July 1st is the no more SWE, or less than 5% of peak SWE remaining range. And so those are kind of two boundary conditions that we've been looking at for developing our program recommendations. Which is not to say you can't fly in the middle, but those are at least two key points. And what those look like is these maps, which again, I've shown these before. On the left side is a map showing April 1st snow-covered area, with yellow, orange, and red being years, being 50% of years have this snow coverage on April 1st. So to fly all the yellow, orange, and red areas, we initially estimate it's about 20 flights for the state. And then on the right, this is the less than 5% SNOTEL or snow-free SNOTEL. And we estimate this is about 7 to 10 flights. And the black line here for reference is the 10,000 foot contour line. So just to remind everybody about how many flights we're talking about. And I'll show this in summary in a minute. So then how do we prioritize areas? Do we need to fly everywhere at every time snapshot, or are there ways that we can kind of divide and conquer or optimize the use of flights if we don't have enough money, or if the flexibility to fly all of the flights that we want to? And so one of the things we'll collect in the stakeholder feedback process is where are existing stakeholders flying and why have they chosen those areas? And it might be as simple as Denver Water chooses to fly over the Blue River Basin because it feeds Dillon Reservoir. There's plenty of other places around the state where ASO data may be collected in, not as clean a watershed, where there's obviously a single reservoir downstream of a single flight. Maybe there's a large enough watershed that it would take 2 flights, but you only have room for 1. So that kind of flexibility of how to identify those key areas and how stakeholders have identified those key areas in the past is one of the things we want to suss out while we're prioritizing areas. Jeff's team is putting together a really great amount of useful output from their flights, but understanding what is the finest sort of useful resolution to stakeholders across the state. There's definitely power users. In fact, I would argue that most of this group are power users of data like this, and they can really get a lot of info. They can do a lot of analysis on the spatial products that Jeff's group creates, but not everybody needs that level of detail. And so figuring out what the useful resolution, both in time and space, is one thing that we want to understand. Again, reiterating a previous point, snow covered area is typically the maximum extent that we would fly, but is there any way we could fly less than this and still get 95% of the valuable information? And a lot of this is going to depend on, how efficient is it for the ASO plane to actually fly over a little bit more area, or actually making flight plans will cover a lot of this. But yeah, what the value is in flying slightly less than the maximum snow covered area. And then the other big question that we have, which will probably be addressed more in tasks 3 and 4 of the project, is who should be given the responsibility to apportion flights? How should that responsibility be divvied up to make sure it's equitable for all sectors and parts of the state, and also kind of efficient and useful information? So it's a tricky question, and where should the final sort of program sit is another question there. DWR, CWCB have both been sort of thrown around as options, but this is something that we're trying to understand a little better, because there's lots of implications for this as we move forward. Again, I've already shown this slide in a previous meeting, but generally the timing options for maximum useful information, there's an argument to be made that you would want a flight every 2 weeks through the year, but also at a certain point you have diminishing returns on the value of those additional flights and the extra information that you get. So while we won't do a full economic analysis on the marginal value of each additional flight, we've been looking more at kind of a wish list of time snapshots to get people most of the info they want. And this will feed into a slide a little bit later, which is ASO is one piece of this sort of all of the above snow measurement approach. And what is the maximum? What is the minimum number of flights we need to get the maximum value out of that program? And this also includes some variation in number of flights by year type, and as well as some pilot basins where we do more intensive flying to suss out really the behavior of Colorado snowpack with much more common measurements. So again, some of the components of this all of the above approach we've discussed, which can mean a lot of things, but ASO is a snapshot in time. It's a very good snapshot, but its full value is realized by combining that snapshot with other tools, including the ability to make projections using metadata and other sort of on the ground validation to say, okay, we flew ASO 3 weeks ago. There's been a snowstorm. There's been some melt. What do we project the SWE content is now above the particular forecast point you're interested in? And that kind of information is really where we can make a tool available to everybody in the state, and you don't have to be an ASO power user to get the most out of this program. There's a lot of different components of this. I think generally what we want is a high accuracy, LiDAR informed, spatially distributed, temporally continuous SWE estimate. And I do not have an acronym for that, though maybe I'll come up with one. But we want all these things, and we want to figure out how to get it, and we want to get it in the hands of everybody if we can. So yeah, again, this is more on that, but we plan on having this as part of the stakeholder engagement process, is understanding what people really need and across sectors, because different sectors have different needs, and we want everybody to make the best informed decisions they can using this innovative and really just cutting edge research tool that we're planning to deploy in an operational context in Colorado. Again, so I've shown this one before as well. This is an example of the California Integrated Snow Monitoring dashboard that the California DWR puts out, that at least initially shows some SWE estimates, runoff forecasts, as well as a comparison of total SWE volume across multiple snowpack products. The main thing to point out here is the bar chart at the bottom shows the comparison of a airborne program, an airborne informed program, which is the red line representing volume in this particular watershed, as compared to the CU Boulder product and the Snowdass product for these particular snapshots in time. So we definitely recognize that people are using a suite of snow tools now, and we don't want to completely eliminate those. So whatever we produce should show a comparison of a new product that we develop that's informed by ASO alongside ones they're more familiar with, like SnowTel, for instance.
Page one, real quick clarification there. There is no ASO data on that page. The ARS model is run separately from ASO. It's the same iSnowbow model, but the ASO version is run by M3 Works. So it's a separate issue or a separate instance. It would be great to get ASO data in that same display there too.
So Jeff, actually, that's a question I've been meaning to ask you. So is this ARS product airborne informed, and it's just not ASOs, or is this just a completely independent model?
The red line on this graph is informed with ASO data, so it is incorporating the ASO flight data as single point adjustments, but it is not an ASO product.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. I was under the impression it was an airborne informed product, but yeah, Jeff, that's a good thing to clarify. Is this is not actually data produced by ASO Inc.
Right.
But the point still stands, which is the red line is sort of one measurement of, is sort of the highest accuracy measurement currently available in this dashboard for remaining snow, and how it stacks up against other products is an important thing for stakeholders to see, especially because many of these products have been around for decades, and we don't want to just write off people's current decision-making process because we think we can do it better. We want to make sure that everybody has a chance to see for themselves just what the value we can bring is. So again, I'm almost done here, and then we'll have us a little fun poll because this Mentimeter thing is super fun. The stakeholder engagement process will cover a variety of different themes. Many of these I've already talked about, but the general approach for it is to have more focused interviews and focus groups that will then inform a wider survey. So we don't expect everybody on this call to want to be involved in a sort of multi-hour focus group and interview, though it would be amazing if you were. But then we expect to use information that we get out of those more intensive processes to inform a larger survey that we could send out and get information from 100 people or more. So there's kind of different components of this, and we're still working out the exact details, but we will definitely contact you. And we're going to go through this Mentimeter poll in a minute so that you can indicate sort of your level of interest in this. Before I get there, just as an example, so this is from California DWR. This is an example of how their Airborne Snow Survey program, how they do their sort of annual scheduling currently, and how they're considering making it more flexible. And they kind of have timelines by basin and flexibility to do more or less flights depending on how wet or dry a particular year is. So this is just an example of kind of what California is doing. And if we just do a first cut and look at what this is in the context of Colorado, this shows just a high level flight planning example for February through June, showing different snapshots in time across all the major river basins, as well as a couple of, or one or two pilot basins that would get more intensive flights, at least for the first few years. And again, this is just one example of how many flights it would take to get this kind of information. I don't want anybody to get offended that the April 1st peak SWE flight gets more for the Colorado, the Yampa, and the South Platte than the other basins. They just have more area that gets more snow. So that's what this is based on. And I think some version of a final flight plan based on time and basin is I think a good way to recommend generally program size and program flexibility. So with that, I'm gonna unshare this screen and then move to a different one, and I'll share this Mentimeter link. I guess first of all, does anybody, before I go into the chat here, does anybody have any questions about anything I went through?
I don't have any questions. Thanks, Paige. That was a great summary.
Cool. All right. Give me a sec to load the Mentimeter poll on my end. So if everybody can see the link that was just shared, you can go to this link and you can fill out this first question. We want to understand, we've asked this questions before, but really we want to understand who our audience is and how you guys can help us complete this project and really come up with a product that's mutually beneficial for everybody. So once you open the link, sorry, I think I heard a question.
It's Taylor. Your screen's, excuse me, screen's not shared, just FYI.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so how about now?
Yep, thanks.
All right, so if you look at if you go to the link that's in the chat, it should give you the option to sort of indicate what sector you represent. And once you've gone there, I'll give it a 30 seconds to a minute for people to answer. We have 35 participants on the call and 14 responses so far, so I'll give it a minute. But I'm heartened every time we look at this and we see a broad range of sectors represented, not just state and local government, but also tribes, agriculture, environment, recreation, because we really want a tool, or we want to make recommendations that are useful for everybody. Not that we don't, not that Denver Water and the Dolores Conservation District aren't important, just that we want to talk to everybody. Give it just another few seconds here. So definitely seeing typically about how our meetings have gone. So a lot of state and local government, a lot of federal government, municipal, but also some representation of other sectors. See if it'll let me.
Oh, and just a quick note, if you did choose other sector, if you could maybe chat me or Paige privately and just let us, we're just curious what those might be. Thanks.
Yeah, that's good. Lots of good info. So now next question's up. So what basin do you represent? And there's people that span multiple basins, but generally somewhere in California. It's a new one. Yeah, just let us know who you represent, and you can just leave that same link open and answer it as the questions update. Yeah, getting some good responses. I do wonder how responses like this correlate to the population of these basins, because I'm guessing it's pretty close. But yeah, again, lots of South Platte, Colorado, Arkansas, but representation from all across the state, California, and again, some other. So it'd be good to know where you're from if you're another. So next, so what do you feel like your role is at your agency, especially in the context of this program? So how, think about this, about how you would use ASO data to benefit your agency, or how you do currently. Are you in an operational role? Are you planning? Are you on the administrative side and might be interested in kind of the cost aspects of it? Do you do technical analysis to take data like this and provide it to those other roles? Are you a researcher? Are you sort of executive level at your agency or other? And again, with other here, do chat myself or Taylor and let us know, yeah, what other roles are, so we can understand what other roles are important for people who are going to be using this data. Okay. Got the same number of responses as before. So keep going. So then, so now this is an open-ended question, and you can just keep it to less than a sentence or just a couple of words if you want. But how have you used snowpack data this runoff season? How have you, within your agency, used that info? You know, it could be as simple as just made different plans for a boating trip that I was thinking about versus made forecasts for how to operate a reservoir. But really just kind of simple high-level answers for what you've used snowpack data for during this runoff season. A lot of drought planning. I would ask anybody who's written drought planning, if we can be in here for another 30 seconds or so, if you could write sort of another couple of words to describe like what you would use snowpack data for related to drought planning. Like, are you changing watering restrictions? Are you choosing to make reservoir releases? Like what about drought planning specifically have you used snowpack data for? I'm just curious. And don't feel like you have to write a long answer. You can always tell us later, but that'd be useful to have in here. Whether I can go on a Yampa River trip in late June, I think that's only valid if you invite me and the rest of the planning team. Okay, definitely getting some good answers here. Forecast irrigation runs for ditch system. Yeah, that's good. Compact forecasting. Yeah, a lot of interesting responses as a comparison to other dry years. That's good. Confirm CBRFC forecast. That's a really good point, is being able to confirm against products you know or other products you use. I think that's you know, one valuable part of any high quality product that we're going to produce. Reservoir operations, operational planning, potential snowtell sighting. Or I said snow light sighting, so I assume that meant snowtell, but I'm not totally sure about that. Where did my water go? Okay, I'll just give this another couple of seconds here. Drought planning, sharing snowtell data with team to see if above or below average, one indicator to help make decisions about watering restrictions. That's really good stuff. This is the kind of information we want to be able to help people make well-informed decisions about as we move forward with this project. Runoff forecasts in multiple rivers and streams. Yep. Cool. All right, we're going to keep going. Thank you for these. What kind of feedback, and specifically this is around the stakeholder engagement process, what kind of feedback do you feel that you can offer the planning team? Like if we reach out to you, what do you think is kind of the most valuable thing you can provide to us? I know that I wish there was a way to also have an open-ended response here, but just answer as many of these as you feel like you can offer help with, and we can always reach back out to you and ask more specific questions.
Hey, Paige, just to jump in here, since we can't combine an open-ended with set answers, the next slide is actually open-ended, that if your type of feedback isn't covered here, you can put that in on the next one.
Got it. Okay, fair enough. So for this one, just answer if one of these options applies to you, one or more of the options, and then the next one, if you have more open-ended feedback for this question, then you can respond there. Yeah, thanks, Taylor. Our operations and supply forecasting insights. Snowpack information your sector needs and when needs it. Snowpack data to data case studies. Political insight is really important, and we are definitely going to need more of that as we move forward. Funding mechanisms and governance is a really big thing. It's fun to put some maps together and plan out flights, but really making sure the program is functional is the the way this whole thing works. Current ASO user, good. And I imagine, yeah, we've heard from a bunch of you guys, and your feedback is always really appreciated. So with that, we'll move forward to anybody with open-ended responses. So other types of Colorado ASO program planning feedback we didn't cover in the last question. So what kind of insight do you feel like you can give us that either we've identified that we need, or that maybe you think we might have overlooked, things that you can provide us that we haven't yet considered, or that you just think you have a unique perspective on? And again, don't feel like you have to write sentences, just a few words is fine. Flight timing, we got value of information, drought planning insight. And a lot of people answered in the previous question, so I'm not expecting everybody to provide answers here. So, and then the last question here. We've asked this before, but now we have sort of a bigger group. Which of these feedback mechanisms would you personally like to contribute to? And we have a range of these, a short survey and a long survey. A short survey or a long survey are likely to be sent out to the entire group, but we definitely want to know if there are people that would like to participate in a facilitated focus group or potentially a direct interview to get as much detailed information as we can. And there will be some feedback between these two. We haven't decided if we're going to send out a survey first and then do a focus group, or vice versa, but really we want to make the best use of everybody's time here while getting the best information we can about kind of how to set up our program. And Taylor and Lorna, you can correct me on this, but I believe we're working with Denver Water's sort of social science team to help develop a set of questions that are not, they're sort of appropriate and not leading, that can actually help us get good answers. So kind of a way to design a survey to actually get productive information and not just, and not be subject to the kind of the pitfalls if you ask leading questions. But yes, Taylor and Lorna, I don't know if you have any feedback on who we're going to be engaged with within Denver Water.
Yeah, we're going to be working with some of our public affairs staff to help design the questions that we ask in the facilitated session that we organize, the focus group session. We might also be using some time on the next meeting to do some of the stakeholder discussion.
Yeah, that's good. A lot of people interested in a direct interview, and honestly, that's amazing to hear. We don't want to force it on anybody and say we have to use a bunch of your time, but the more people that are excited about it, I mean, that's really great to hear. And I really do appreciate every time how engaged people are in this whole process. I mean, I think I get invites to 10 Zoom calls a week, and this is one of the best attended. So I think people really like it. And so with that, that is all I think that's all the questions we had. I don't know why it's not advancing. Yeah, so that's the end of that info. Thank you everybody for taking the time to respond, and we will collect that feedback and reshare it. But yeah, feedback's always appreciated, and anybody who indicated that they would like to be part of either surveys or focus groups, interviews, we definitely will use this info to reach back out to you. So don't feel like you're anonymous and can hide if you said you wanted to do an hour interview. So with that, I can give it back to Emily, and I think we're basically done, but I'll let her wrap us up.
Great, thanks, Paige. That was a great update, and thanks for everybody's feedback. Yeah, so that's pretty much what we wanted to get through today. Just getting back to the homework that we mentioned earlier. We're just gonna share the reports, or actually they're available on ASO Inc.'s website. I can put the link in the chat, and we can also send an email to everyone. But if you could take a look at those and think about, what is useful for you and what additions or changes would be helpful, and just like any kind of feedback on that would be helpful. And I think we're going to collect the feedback at next month's meeting, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. Anybody else? There's the link that should have those reports. And just a reminder that the next month's meeting was moved to July 14th to accommodate the July 4th holiday. So I think that's all we have, unless anyone has something to add.